Get ready for another microdose. And hey, if this information is jiving with you, then check out the full episode. The link is in the show notes. Enjoy the ride.
So you're asking, what is the relationship between sort of current testosterone levels and these different aspects of behavior, or how does testosterone influence these typically masculine, or not, I shouldn't say typically masculine behaviors, but behaviors that are more characteristic of men than women on average, really.
Right. Yes. That's the latter of the two. And then what does that imply for our understanding of human behavior more broadly, which I think you touched on quite a bit in the last question, but just, if we could go.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So in a bunch of different mammals that have been studied to date, and not all mammals, but mammals where males benefit reproductively from competing for females, especially. So that could be competing in the way that peacocks compete by not super aggressive fighting, but trying to influence female choice by showing off. Or it could be more intense physical competition, like in the red deer. It depends on the mating system, of course. Human males are competing in very different ways, and that could just be competing socially for status by trying to be a really good baseball player or work at a hedge fund or whatever it is that can increase social status in a way that is attractive to women. It doesn't, of course, have to involve physical competition, but I should just say our evolutionary history is one where the human physical competition among men has declined the expression of that has declined over time on a time scale that suggests it's not due to genetic changes over time. It's due to social changes. And that's just a shout out to the influence of culture on what we might think typically masculine behaviors are. Culture is incredibly important. But if you I'm really am interested in rough and tumble play, because this is a typically masculine behavior. I have a 14-year-old boy who's not an athlete. He's very creative. He likes theater. However, he loved wrestling his friends when they came over. He still does that. And it scares me now because they're getting bigger and stronger. But that's really interesting, because that is, in my view, and this is controversial, but I just don't see the evidence against it. I don't see an alternative explanation. And we know that this happens in non-human animals, that juvenile males, say in chimpanzees, more than females, or take rats. It's very clear in rats because we can do experiments in rats. The males will stand up on their hind legs and kind of play fight, play box, or they'll wrestle each other. And they have stereotyped moves that have been well documented. And that's rough and tumble play for them. As far as it looks like rats are having fun, it looks like they are. And what they're learning is how to read the signals of their competitors. And all that play is, it's rewarded via a dopamine, like a upregulation in dopamine. Basically, there's motivation and reward. And there seems to be a relationship between the neural structures that testosterone influences the development of in utero or directly post-birth, depending on the species, and the way that different kinds of environmental or social stimuli trigger a dopamine response. So that means that play is motivated and rewarded more in males than in females. And it serves an evolutionary purpose, because if you deprive the animals of testosterone, so first of all, if you deprive males of testosterone in or directly post in utero or post birth, they don't engage in rough and tumble play. If you give it to females, they do. So it is obviously testosterone mediated. And then in addition, if you have a male who had normal testosterone levels in utero and you deprive him of the ability to engage in rough and tumble play, he backs down from confrontation in adulthood. He will not physically defend his territory, for instance. So it is crucial for male animals for males, and in humans, I would imagine for boys, to engage in rough and tumble play if they want to, it's harder to talk about humans because they don't express that kind of aggression. But I would say over our evolutionary history, that's been a really crucial part of behavior. Boys need to play physically. And just as an aside, I think it's a disaster that the American school systems require boys to just sit still in their seats and punish them for having the kind of energy that they do in fact have, and is totally healthy and needs to be channeled, in positive ways. So that was just one example of rough and tumble play. But what's interesting about testosterone and what's consistent about it is that it has a lot to do with sex, how to get sex, and in the species where or how to get mates also. So not just sex, because some species are monogamous and males will have to compete to find a mate, but once they find her, they stay with her. And that is the best way for those males to increase their reproductive success. But in the species where it makes sense to have more than one mate, then if there needs to be physical competition, that rough and tumble play is important. And again, if it's a seasonal breeder, then testosterone rises and falls in a way that maps onto female fertility. And as it rises and falls, so does aggression. Unless it's, say, in a bird species where male-male competition takes a different form, and that is through kind of trying to influence female choice. So in humans, it's basically permanently high after puberty, and we can't do experiments. So I can't say for sure, I know that testosterone causes any specific behavior. However, we do have information from transgender people who transition with hormones, and it's about sex. So one thing that's not controlled in the transgender population is that males were already exposed to high testosterone in utero and females were not. However, if I did actually just start taking testosterone, which I'm happy to talk about later, at female level.
My wife would like to know about that.
Okay, and I'm happy to talk about it. But if I were to transition and take male typical levels before I grew a beard or started losing hair or developed muscles, I would become super horny. So horny that it would freak me out. And as a woman, because I've taught, not only is this, and again, there's huge amount of variety here in what people experience, but what I have heard from talking to people over and over, and this is substantiated fairly well, the effects on libido in the scientific literature, that it's like a male puberty, and females who go through this say, oh my God. Sorry, this gets me emotional actually, because I think it's a very profound insight for women or females, or that men are not always loving the preoccupation with body parts and sex that they go through life with. And that my view is this should not be shameful. And it upsets me that it is a source of social shame, and it's associated with toxic, this word toxic. Behavior may be shameful and toxic, but I think that the testimony I've heard from trans men, so females again who transitioned, is that they have a huge amount of empathy for men who they used to resent for staring at their boobs. And they thought these guys were just assholes. And then they start doing something similar. And they say, okay, now I get it. It's something that I have failed to restrain. It's very difficult to restrain the desire and the fantasies. And what's interesting, sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but what's interesting is that men, it's on top of a desire for love and to be loved and to have commitment and a rich, nurturing, loving relationship. It's just another component that women don't seem to have. and not understand that it's in addition. And that's because there are different strategies that males can use to be reproductively successful. Females also have some different strategies, but the strategy of, one night stands and having this extreme attraction to the body is just not really, doesn't serve female reproduction in the way that it can serve male reproduction. And that, to me, I really do think that is testosterone mediated, partly because of the evidence from transgender people and partly from gay men who are just not influenced by the restraints that female sexuality imposes. They have a very masculine sexuality. They have the same amount of testosterone at all life stages as heterosexual men. And they have a typical male desire for a higher number of sexual partners, high libido, and lesbians do not. Like, it's a completely different culture. There's a reason, and it's testosterone.
Hey, thanks for joining us on this journey. Small doses lead to big changes. If you're vibing with this snippet, then take a listen to the full episode by clicking the link in the show notes. If you would like to plug in deeper to what we're doing, head to mentalkingmindfulness.com or text MTM to 33777. Until next time, peace.